Welcome to the Endurance Horse Podcast, where endurance riders from all across the globe gather, sharing their stories, goals, and progress as they train for and compete in endurance events at every level. So kick off your shoes, pull up a chair, and listen as we gather around the virtual campfire and listen to friends from across the world.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Endurance Horse Podcast. I am your host, Christina Hike, and this year on Endurance Horse Podcast, we are celebrating the Year of the Horse by shining a spotlight on a different breed each month, and February belongs to the American Saddlebred. They are brave, they are bold, they are beautiful and versatile, and sometimes, yes, a little spicy. What happens when you take a horse known for the show ring and you point them towards the mountains, the deserts, and 50-mile days? What happens when you believe in that partnership more than the stereotype? Today's guest is lifelong American Saddlebred horsewoman and endurance rider, Shelah Wetter, owner of Blue Haven Stable. Over the past decade, Shelah has logged more than 20,000 endurance miles aboard American Saddlebreds, building longevity, earning awards, and proving that these horses are built for far more than the show ring. Shelah has earned recognition within the American Saddlebred sport horse community and most recently won the 2025 Sport Horse Owner of the Year. In this episode, we talk about how she found endurance, why she stayed, what makes Saddlebreds shine on the trail, and one of the most important lessons she's learned along the way. So if you love saddlebreds or just love horses in general that have a lot of heart, grit, and a little extra spark, you're going to love this conversation. So grab your favorite drink, settle into a comfy chair, and gather around the virtual campfire. Because today on Endurance Horse Podcast, it's all about the American Saddlebred, endurance miles, and the long road to longevity. So let's get started. Without further ado, let's welcome Shelah Wetter to Endurance Horse Podcast. Hey Shelah, how are you doing today? This is Chris Hike from Endurance Horse Podcast.
Good morning. I'm doing very well.
So thank you so much for taking my call. And I have 3 questions that I always start out with every time. And that first one is always, how did you get into horses?
Well, my mother has been breeding saddlebreds for as long as I've been alive and a little bit before. She started her horse career when she was 9 years old. She got her first horse, and so I was born into the industry.
So then how did you do endurance riding? How did you find that?
I accidentally stumbled on endurance. A friend of mine who had been trail riding with said in the spring, in April, there's an endurance ride. Do you want to do it? And so I did my first endurance ride knowing absolutely nothing about the sport.
So how did that go?
It actually went very well. It was local to us. And so on my way home from work on Friday night, the night before the ride, I stopped at the ride and asked a few questions from a nice person who happened to be standing there, like, how do I find the trail? Because I had no idea how to find the trail or anything. And so I did not go to ride meeting. I didn't do anything that you normally would do. And I showed up the next morning and did the ride, and it actually went very well. I think we ended up second and third.
That's really good. So was that a saddlebred you took?
It was, yes. It was a young saddlebred. I think she must have been 7 or 8 years old.
So have all your endurance miles been on a saddlebred?
They have.
Wow. You might be one of the few people then that has done all your miles on a saddlebred.
And I'm pretty sure all of the miles have been on horses that my mother and I have bred.
Wow. That's amazing. So what was it about endurance that made you stick with it? And did you do any other sport before it?
Hilariously, I was not immediately hooked like most people say. I believe I told my husband I don't know that I'll do that again. As I walked sideways down the stairs for several days because I was really sore. It's sort of something that snowballed, and I just continued to dabble in it for a few years. Not real seriously, but for fun. And it sort of snowballed. And I have been competitive in the saddle seat ring since I was 5 years old. So I grew up showing horses.
That is a very big contrast.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that is. So how was that transition for you from ring riding to the rugged terrain?
Well, I like I said, I grew up my entire life showing saddlebreds and in saddle seat and also driving horses. And when I was 26, I was in a serious horse accident, and that changed the trajectory of my life. I knew that I wanted to continue doing horse things, but that I was no longer passionate about show horses. Not that it was necessarily a show horse injury, it was a young horse, but it it for sure changed my mentality about what I wanted to do in the future. And so I ended up trail riding for a year or two before I ended up kind of snowballing into endurance.
So was it picking saddlebreds for endurance because that's what you had and that's what you decided to do? Or did you become passionate about, I'd really like to show people what this breed can do?
Well, it for sure started with that's what I had. And my first endurance ride, we did very well. It was a limited distance ride. It was 25 miles,
Mm-hmm.
but we ended up taking home best condition. And so I think that it sort of evolved. At first it was what I had, and then it became passionate as far as showing people what saddlebreds could do.
So where do you think saddlebreds really shine on the trail? I mean, like mentioned before on the podcast, I have a half saddlebred that I've done a little bit with, and he's older now, but I just felt like he was really forward and he had a good mind and he took really good care of me, which he is part draft, so I mean, it could be either way, but I just really enjoy how forward he is. So, in your opinion, with over 20,000 miles of saddlebreds down the trail, how do they shine?
I think that they shine in their brains. They're very level headed, generally speaking. They are very interested in being your partner. And in general, I think they're pleasantly forward without being too much or sort of uncomfortably forward. Typically speaking, they all are happy to walk if I want to walk, and they're happy to go if I want to go. Of course, some can be a little more forward than others, but in general, I would say they're all very pleasantly forward and not exhausting to ride.
Did Natalie did she get Brave from you?
She's gotten all her saddlebreds and Flash from me.
I thought that's what she had told me recently. He's, done extremely well. And so do you have horses for sale for towards endurance?
We do, depending on what we have left. My mother is aging, and so our breeding program is slowing down, but we do sell horses as endurance horses, yes.
What do you think people misunderstand about saddlebreds as endurance horses or just in general? What do you think people's stereotype that just really isn't true?
I think that for a long time, saddlebreds were advertised as solely a show horse, and that wild-eyed look and sort of like dancy prancy demeanor has been misinterpreted as something that's only good for the show ring, where a lot of times that is a taught and encouraged thing. You want a show horse to be exciting and fun to look at, whereas I don't think in their day-to-day lives they're nearly that way. I mean, of course, they are a hotter horse, but typically speaking, I think they're misunderstood as being something that is only useful in the show ring, as well as their gait is so enhanced that I think people don't see them as being efficient on trail.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I've only really had one horse who wasted a lot of energy with high knees, and it was so natural to her. It wasn't really wasted energy. It was just kind of who she was and how she moved. Whereas most of them can flatten out and have low knees in general. I was going to say, I think a lot of people just see what's in the show ring and don't think that it will transfer to the trail as well as it does.
Tell me about your mother's program at Blue Haven, the history of Blue Haven stables, and if people are interested in saying, maybe my next endurance horse could be a saddlebred. Or I love saddlebreds, but I want to find one that is suited for endurance?
My mother's been there at Blue Haven and breeding saddlebreds for about 35 years. And I never really appreciated how much work she put into having sound mentally and physically horses with good legs and good feet that are athletes until I kind of grew up and was able to look around. She's put a lot of time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears into having correct horses. And that has for sure benefited me as I use them in a more versatile way.
And you do, on occasion, have some for sale?
Yes, we do. Usually we'll have a couple for sale every year. It just kind of depends on how much we breed. We are slowing down, but we do have some available, yes.
Or you could help somebody if they were looking. You could help connect them with your network.
Absolutely. I do know lots of people in the show horse industry as well as breeders who are breeding nice horses.
I'd be remiss, since you mentioned Flash, I'd be remiss not to take the opportunity to ask a little bit more about him. How did you find Flash?
Flash actually came from a saddlebred breeder, and he was one of the last in his Hackney pony breeding program. And I accidentally purchased Flash, which is kind of
Oops.
a running.
You make that sound like you accidentally pushed the like buy cart on your Amazon account.
Well, it's sort of a running joke as I tend to accidentally purchase quite a few horses and ponies. I was actually looking for something that would fit into my lesson program. I have a very healthy lesson program and quite a few endurance clients who kind of come in through there. And I was looking for a Hackney pony who would be a lesson pony. And they had Flash, who was mostly unhandled, and he accidentally came home with me. And so I obviously can't ride ponies as an adult. And so Kyla happened to be around the barn, and I talked to her and her family about whether or not she would be willing to help me get him broke to ride. And she was. And so she has done all of the ridden work with him. And their family happened to be moving, and it just they accidentally also bought him and took him with them.
Well, I did see a trailer loading video with him the other day where he just self-loaded from the barn into the trailer by himself. So, maybe he just snuck in that trailer to get
Yes.
going with them. That's so cute. This kind of is not a segue I planned on, but it's been something that's kind of been at my heart for the podcast for 2026, and that is growing the sport and having young riders come along. I ran across a American Horse Council statistic the other day that said since 2003, there are like 25% less horses nationwide than there were, which I found that quite concerning. It seems like endurance and barrel racing and all the things, they're competing for fewer horse owners now. And since you do have a healthy and thriving lesson program, could you speak to how can we get new riders in general for general riding, and how can we get those riders to then become people who love distance riding?
That is a difficult question. I think that for people who are not born into the horse community, that lesson programs are incredibly important for easing people into the industry, because otherwise, how are you going to be exposed to the equine industry if you're not in a lesson program, and especially a lesson program that is open to different disciplines? I think that's very important. My lesson program, we do have a lot of people who come into endurance, but also I have trail riders, I have people who show, I have quite a bit of diversity in my clientele. And so I think it's important that people who are helping beginners to encourage a love of riding in whatever they end up doing later on in their career.
Right. I used to teach horseback riding for years, and I was very upfront about I'm a general horsemanship person. I can kind of help you with dressage, but if you suddenly think you want to be a Western pleasure rider, here's a phone number to go here to this guy down the road who's a judge and a champion, and you can go. And that always worked out well for me. I think that if there's anybody listening who's thought about teaching riding, even if it was to a handful of clients, I hope that they do, because it's not like I want to be alarmist, but we all have the perception that the sport is shrinking and that horse ownership in general is shrinking, and I think it's true. And I think us as horse owners, we almost have to pass that torch to the next generation. Would you agree with that?
I agree completely. And I also think that anytime we can help beginners to get started, even if it's just a few lessons in the beginning, just teaching up down, that kind of helps to ignite people's passion. Because if people don't ever put a foot in the stirrup, they'll never learn how to love riding.
Mm-hmm. I don't know why this is on my heart to say it right now, so maybe one person will be affected by it, and if they are, I hope they email me and tell me, because we've kind of missed the Christmas window, but everybody has birthdays coming up. So grandparents are, if you don't want to teach somebody to ride, or an aunt or somebody like, hey, I don't want to do that, I got time to condition, maybe find a good stable and gift your niece, nephew, grandchild, neighbor, gift them a package of lessons, and hope that you do plant a seed, because I really do think that the numbers are showing that horse ownership is dwindling. And part of why I do the podcast, I love the sport and I love the horses, and I want it all to keep going forward.
I think that is an excellent recommendation. And I also have had a lot of children enter my lesson program from grandparents purchasing riding lessons. And they, all in all, I believe, understand how important horses are for all of us. I have had a lot of young girls who have really, really thrived being around horses, learning about horses, learning how to take care of something. There's something extremely therapeutic to it. And I think that is an excellent recommendation that I completely agree with.
That young person in your life that is online too much, buy them a lesson package somewhere and get them onto the horse line. So shifting gears here. So you've logged over 20,000 miles on saddlebreds. What have they taught you?
A lot. A lot. Hey, let me gather my thoughts on that.
Yes, that was a hard transition. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
It kind of fits, though, with horses and what you just said about horses teaching young girls and being therapeutic. And you've got 20,000 miles of endurance therapy under your belt, plus all the conditioning miles.
I have learned a lot in 20,000 miles. I started trail riding from a place of fear. I was recovering from this big accident, and I was incredibly scared. I was scared to walk over a ditch. I was scared to walk around rocks. I was incredibly fearful. And so I think that has benefited me when I teach people, because I can relate to that fear that a lot of people have. But riding so many miles has really helped me to learn how to trust a horse, and has helped me to learn how to have that confidence again. And it's something that really only comes with time in the saddle and time with a horse. I still struggle with not trusting a new horse, but my faithful horses that I ride miles and miles, I have learned how to trust them. And of course, my saddlebreds have since taken very, very good care of me. I've ridden them all over the West Coast, and my husband and I actually rode in the Grand Canyon, and I rode my saddlebred mare there, and that is something I could have never even fathomed doing 20,000 miles ago. So my change in my trust levels and my ability has been extreme. And I've learned that, we change physically as well. I am much stronger. I'm much more confident and capable in the saddle than I used to be. As people who do sports, you get better and better at it the more you do.
What's something that you do now from what you've learned that you wish you had known way back in the beginning?
I guess I think that Something I have learned is that sometimes you just get on the horse and you go riding, and it doesn't have to be perfect. And you can get on and you can go riding, and you do that enough times and things get better. If you're facing confidence problems, things get better. Another thing I think I've learned is that having the right horse at the right time is incredibly important. If you are nervous and you're overhorsed, it's not going to be a pleasant experience. So having the right horse for you at this time is really important. And you might need to go backwards in your horse's competition level or hotness level. You might need to go back on something a little bit safer if you are struggling with confidence and ability.
Speaking of the right horse at the right time, it's a perfect segue for you to tell us about Red Hot Inferno. What makes him so special to you, and what made him the right horse at the right time?
Well, I just love that horse. He is really, really fabulous. I picked him out as a 3-year-old. I think we had 5 3-year-olds, and I picked him out. Unfortunately, he was a lot shorter then. He has grown a significant amount. He ended up being 16.2 hands high, which is pretty high to get on.
Mm-hmm.
I wish he would have stayed a little smaller, but he grew, and so it is what it is. And he is very safe, very forward. He's the first horse that I picked out as an endurance horse, whereas I didn't just ride what I had, and I picked him specifically as an endurance horse. And he's been fabulous. He is sensitive and forward and hot, and he has allowed me to do a lot of rides with my clients. He has a level enough head that we can slow down or we can speed up, and he is all in all just a pretty good citizen. He is on the sensitive side, and he's a little harder to camp with and such because he's high maintenance, but he has been a really fabulous horse for me.
So what was it about him that had you choose him from the other ones?
I actually don't know. I think it was feel. I just happened to pick him, and there wasn't a things I could write out on paper about him. He was kind, and I was drawn to him.
I believe that could be one of the most important things. I mean, confirmation and everything aside, having just bought a new puppy that I told you about earlier, that was completely a feel thing, too. And I think that connection, maybe that's where that connection starts, is that first feeling that you get from that horse.
Absolutely. And as someone who has had a lot of horses, I think, of course, when you get to practice that feel, you kind of get an idea for it. And he was always a very type A student. So even as a 3-year-old, he only knew how to do a couple of things, but he was so eager to try and do those things. And that was really appealing to me, to have a partner who wanted to do what I wanted to do.
So you were just recently named 2025 ASHBA Sport Horse Owner and Breeder of the Year. What does that mean to you, that recognition? I mean, that they don't hand that out lightly. That is quite an honor for you to get.
I am honored. A little bit. I feel like it is because of my mother that I have came here. Breeding has not always been my passion. It has for sure been my mother's passion. I have come along with her and, of course, helped her do the breeding program. But she has really, really put a lot of her life's effort into breeding sound, healthy, correct horses. And so I have benefited from her work. Of course, like I said, I worked alongside her, but that has truly been her passion. Breeding has never enticed me as much as it has her. And so I feel very honored, as well as I feel like I need to give recognition where it is due, because she really has given me the ability to work with these lovely horses who are sound in mind and body. And I appreciate that opportunity greatly.
So which bloodlines does your mom favor?
That is a lot of science that I probably don't have time to talk about, because she is very, very involved in pedigrees. She does typically favor some of the older bloodlines, so you get a little bit more sturdy horse with bigger bones. and maybe not as much prettiness.
Mm-hmm.
So that favors me very well for sport horses because I get a little bit more substance. But all in all, I think we've had some of everything as long as we start with a correct horse.
Mm.
I think that's the first place to look is whether or not your horse is pretty correct. Of course, we can deal with some things that aren't great, but if you start with a horse that is pretty correct and has a nice brain, then you can go on from there.
Yeah. So which bloodlines do you think do promote bone? Because I love that you mentioned that because a lot of horses seem to be lacking in the foundation there.
It's hard to name a bloodline. Of course, all of your wing commander horses are going to be a little sturdier as well as your Stonewall King horses, but even some of the more modern day horses can have very nice bones and good feet. I competed a horse who was a Undulata's Nutcracker daughter who was extremely popular and famous as a stallion. And she had lovely bones and she was pretty correct. And I competed her for a season or two. She only stopped competing because of an injury. But I think even in our more modern horses that we have that are kind of bred for the show ring, you can still find sturdier, bigger boned, bigger footed horses that may be a little bit coarse for the show ring. I think oftentimes those horses make extremely nice sport horses, but they don't have to be coarser. I've competed a couple of extremely pretty horses that I have had veterinarians comment that they were too pretty to do endurance on. So I think that even those pretty horses that are very pretty, very maybe more feminine, I think they also can compete. It just depends on the horse.
So when we talked before we started recording, you mentioned Versa. Can you tell me a little bit about Versa for the American Saddlebred?
Yes.
So let me read a little bit from their website. I pulled it up when you mentioned it to me, and it says celebrating the versatility of the American Saddlebred, mainly like an awards program.
Yes. So they do some awards as well as they do in general promotion of the saddlebred as a versatile animal. So they do a lot of work with ranch riding and some dressage and endurance, and they try and promote horses as being versatile and not just being show ring horses.
You are actually on the board of Versa.
Yes, I'm a member and I'm also on the board.
So this goes back to our promoting horses in general question, kind of, because I know people listen to the podcast when they're driving or they're doing chores, and you never know who's listening and who you might inspire. So I was wondering, what does Versa do right to be trying to be promoting and pulling people in? Because I see that they have some simple things that, you might overlook, but, they have a downloadable coloring book. And they seem to be quite passionate about just promoting horses in general.
I think that what they do right is it is a group of people who are dedicated to helping the American Saddlebred continue on as a horse that is more useful than just the show ring. As we see in all of our breeds, that it is really important that they all can be used by normal people who do normal things and who are not only showing in very expensive disciplines. And that's something that I think probably all of us horse people are pretty passionate about, is getting people to love horses and to do things with horses that are affordable. Because as we see, the show ring is a very expensive experience that not all can play in. And so it's very important that horses in general get used in ways that normal everyday people can enjoy them in.
I think it's important for us as horse people too, not to keep blinders on and make automatic assumptions about breeds all the time. We categorize things very quickly.
Absolutely. As well as I think that we as horse people need to be a little bit more supportive of people who are entering the sport on any horse that they have, whether it's a saddlebred or a Morgan or a quarter horse. I have seen quarter horses do wonderfully in the sport of endurance. And so I think it's important that we are all welcoming for people who are entering the sport on any horse that they have.
That's also another great transition there, because my next question for you was for anybody new listening, who's just interested in maybe getting into endurance, or they are about to start their first year this year. What advice would you have for somebody coming in new?
My advice would be just to ride your horse and enter a ride. If you can ride your horse for 10 or 15 miles, then you can go to an endurance ride and you can enter the limited distance, which is a 25 miler. Generally speaking, endurance people are very friendly, very welcoming. And if you love to ride, this is a great sport because you get a lot of opportunity to spend on and with your horse. And really the rest will follow. You can learn the rules, you can learn how to do it. There are great information sources online. AERC and EDRA both have good information sources. And so the rules and the particulars will come, but just getting started by riding a lot is going to be your first step.
I'm so glad you mentioned EDRA, because that came up on my radar actually recently this week, and I hadn't been aware of EDRA. So could you tell me a little bit about EDRA? I know it's mostly like a Canadian and Pacific Northwest, right? Like around Washington, Montana.
Yes, it is mostly the rides are held in the Northwest, and the motto of Equine Distance Riding Association, short EDRA, is start ready and finish proud. And the mission of EDRA is to promote at all levels and to all members safe, competitive equine distance riding events and experiences. So that comes straight from the website. And I do quite a few EDRA rides, mostly because they are local and available. But the real focus that I would say I see in EDRA is safety. They have things set in motion like a concussion protocol that is discussed regularly at ride meetings, as well as at every ride there is a ride steward who is responsible for making sure that the rules are known, as well as if there are any disagreements, the steward is there to help fix those immediately so that everybody kind of has a voice that's heard and the rules get followed.
Can you explain to me how EDRA started and how is it complementary to AERC? Is it a similar thing, just a little bit different?
EDRA is very similar to AERC. There are some differences in rules. Horses need to be a year older to compete in the same distances than AERC. And there's a little bit different focus. It's kind of more of a family type feeling since there are a lot less rides. I think there's probably 10 or less EDRA rides a year. So it is a smaller, very friendly, very kind of family feel to EDRA.
I briefly, because somebody mentioned this to me the other day, I briefly looked at the website and it definitely had more of a family feel and more of a all distances, like all of it being encompassing. Since you've shown other ways, you understand that topic that keeps coming up online year after year for the last 20 plus years, that the word endurance is used to describe the entire sport. But then it's also, I would akin it to, this is so hard to start. I've been told not to touch this subject, but I think it's out there. It needs to get resolved. And I just think it's wording has hung up the sport and it's injuring it. And I think it's just words. It's just words, people. But for an example, somebody recently wrote a post and I said, hey, if you want to expound on this, come on the podcast and expound. But if you run barrel racing, no matter what level, you're a barrel racer. If you do dressage at any level, you're a dressage rider. Jumping, cross country is the same. But there always seems to be some kind of a damaging thing that happens to a lot of people. And it's not even, I won't even say it's a rite of passage, because if it is, it's not a very healthy one. But when they start in the sport and then they have joined an endurance association, they have been told they're going to an endurance ride, and then they compete at any distance and they're told they're not riding endurance. And I think it's really important that it's so hard to get new people. It's so hard. Embrace them when you get them. Don't be dividing things. And I wish that 50s were an up or called something, just so those people can have the elite name that they deserve, that they do deserve. But, or call it all distance riding, but
Sure.
we have to embrace new people or this puddle dries. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So for me, as someone who is a little bit newer to endurance, I've only been doing it, 10, 12 years. But as a horse person my entire life, I see a little bit bigger picture. For me, when I look at it, I see the entire horse industry is shrinking and changing. The entire horse industry is facing difficulties having people join. And with endurance, we faced a specific problem that is distance and toughness, and the time to train a horse to be a 50 or 100-mile horse is changing. People now don't have the time to train a horse to be a 50 and 100-mile horse like in times past. I think people spent a lot more time on horses. And so in our history, when horses were used more, then they could transfer into endurance easier. And now we're having difficulties with finding enough property to train on. We're finding difficulties with having enough people who are already riders. And so when we're starting people in the sport, there's a difference in how much horses have been used in their life, as well as how much people are riding in their life. And so we're finding this struggle in property to train a horse, where the suburban crawl is happening all over the United States. And so I think that in itself is changing the sport of distance. And I think that as that happens more and more, and distance riders have a harder and harder time finding enough property to train a horse on, that our distances are going to change, and we're going to have to kind of rework how we think of things. Because even 30 and 40 years ago, there were so many more people and horses who were able to do 100-mile rides. And I think in the future that is going to continue to decline, and we're going to need to regroup.
I agree, because if you even look back, I had a very active group of riding friends growing up. I'm the last one with horses. Not any of them kept horses. There was one that did for a while, and then when she got remarried, her husband said, gotta sell the horse. And she did. So, out of that high school 4-H era that I grew up in, I'm it. And out of my family, multiple people in my family owned horses for a long time. I'm the last one. So I think you're right. It used to be, if you went back 30 years ago, there were a lot more people that had horses, and they just are no longer part of their life. So I think it's a precious commodity. And I think if anybody's listening and you're at a ride and you meet a new person and they say they just did their first endurance ride, I really don't even care if it was 15 miles. I think you need to celebrate that person and welcome them into your sport. That is the future of your sport, standing right in front of you.
Absolutely. And having people who enjoy horses, that is the point. That is the point of all of this. That is the point of horse sport, is it is supposed to be fun. And so if we can, I agree totally, celebrate people having fun with their horse in any capacity, then that is a win.
Be kinder.
Or at least don't be mean.
Yeah. Go back to what your grandma said. You can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. And
Absolutely.
we just need more of that. You just need more of that. And when you see that new person there, you need to say, welcome, we're so glad you're here, because if things dry up, then there's fewer rides, which I do see that too.
And another thing that you can mention with that is being a ride manager is a hard, hard job. And being a little bit nicer to our ride managers, I think sometimes is something that is very important. I have managed rides, and I still manage one ride a year, and it is very difficult, and you do not make money off of managing rides. So having a little bit of patience and maybe not taking it quite so seriously, I think is really important. And being thankful.
Yes, being very thankful. I managed one ride, but I had my family help me mark trail on 4-wheelers and do all those things. And my brother kept the tanks full. And there was just so much help from my family for that ride. But it was it was during COVID, so it was very difficult to host to begin with. But then I had the Distance Riding Association of Wisconsin members help me. They brought, the vets some food, and they helped me with I had no idea how to turn the paperwork in and do all of that. And they helped with that part of it. And they're like, oh, this is easy, because they knew how to do it. I didn't know how to do it. So to me, it was like a godsend to have, a ride secretary who knew what she was doing, and people come and put all the points in for me and do all of that. And they're like, oh no, you already did the heavy lifting. But I did enjoy it. And I think that's another thing to bring up. If people want to see rides in their area, they maybe have to learn how to ride manage.
Yes, as well as I think volunteering is an excellent way to kind of learn about the sport. I have had many people who were just kind people that I knew through my lesson program, moms, dads, who came and helped me put on rides and did things like pulsing. If you want to get involved in any endurance ride, but you're kind of scared to do it, I think volunteering is a wonderful way to kind of put your toes in and get an idea of what the sport is.
That's so true. So as we wind up here, I want to ask you, as you look ahead, we know we already covered some of the negative, like shrinking horse owners in general, but what excites you most about the future of your sport and for your horses?
I am not one to look to the future with big plans personally. I have always kind of been someone who rides in the moment, who enjoys the moment, and I haven't really been one to look to the future with a lot of excitement. So that is a little bit hard for me to answer, because even though I've ridden 20,000 miles in the last 10 years, it's not really something I planned. It's something that I did ride by ride. And so I think for me personally, I am excited to see where my 3 current endurance horses end up. I'm excited to see what they can do. I have 2 younger horses that I'm bringing along, and by younger, I mean 8 and 9. Mm-hmm. And I find the journey very satisfying and very interesting to know where they'll end up. As well as I have some young riders who are gifted and work very hard, and I'm excited to see what they can accomplish.
If you could leave our listeners with one piece of encouragement or advice, what would that be?
I would say to put the saddle on the horse and go for a ride in whatever capacity that makes you happy. If you want to try out an endurance ride, I think you need to put your saddle on and you need to go out riding. And that is basically what we all love to do. We all love to ride. We all love to be with our equine companions, and spending more time with them is a gift. And if you have that ability, or you can make that happen, I think that all of us find joy from that. And that's really what it's all about.
Shelah, it has been wonderful talking to you. And I do love this American Saddlebred. They are a wonderful horse. And I think you're so wonderful to honor your mom alongside the award that you just received. And I think that's just wonderful. And it speaks volumes about just the journey you've had with her, with the Saddlebreds, and as a daughter, and competing. And I'm sure it's been wonderful for her to watch you go do things with the horses that she bred.
I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, and hopefully someone who is listening to this will put a saddle on and go for a ride and have a great day.
I hope they do. Thank you so much for being on Endurance Horse Podcast. And that's a wrap for another episode of Endurance Horse Podcast. Thank you so much for staying all the way to the end. If this episode encouraged you, made you smile, or simply kept you company on a busy day, we are so glad that we could be here with you and for you today. Thank you so much for being a part of our journey. We truly appreciate you. I do have a small favor to ask, though. Could you share this episode on social media for us? Maybe text it to a friend that might enjoy the podcast, or leave a positive review on the app that you're listening on. Word of mouth is one of the most powerful ways that this podcast continues to grow, and I truly appreciate your help. And if you'd like to support the show in a tangible way that helps keep us on the air, please visit WARHORSEendurance.com to sign up for one of the WARHORSE Endurance Challenges. I promise you, these events are awesome, and we give out some beautiful awards. to become a part of a positive, friendly online community that encourages one another daily. We invite you to join our Facebook group, WARHORSE Challenges. Whether you ride 1 mile or 100, you will be part of a supportive group that celebrates your journey every day. This is Endurance Horse Podcast, signing off for now. Every mile a memory. Now I'm going to go load my horse up and go for a ride. Edit this later. Endurance Horse Podcast is produced by Christina Hike Photography, LLC, and is a WARHORSE Endurance production.